Hey folks, Dave here with another quick model making tip from Thunder Mesa Studio. A question I am very often asked is what software do I use to draw my track plans, or as I like to call them, layout maps? Well, today I'm going to let you in on all of the secrets. And the first secret is it's not software, it's hardware. What you need is one of these. Now I have drawn literally hundreds of track plans over the years. Some fanciful, some practical, most unbuilt. All different scales and gauges, you name it. But they all have one thing in common. Regardless, they were all done with one of these. Pencil on paper, usually some form of blue line grid paper, what we used to call non-photo blue in the graphic design business. This is the stuff you want. Now there are some great bundles of track planning software out there. 3D Planet comes to mind. But you really don't need to go out and buy a bunch of expensive software if you're just getting started and want to draw a track plan. You just need a pencil and a few drafting tools and some blue line paper like this. And I'll show you exactly my method for doing this. So let's talk about some of the tools and materials here that we'll be using in addition to the pencil and the blue line grid paper. I also have a bar compass, which is very handy for drawing larger circles. I've got a, just a regular like school compass you might be familiar with, good straight edge, a French curve, which is very handy for making curved lines which are not perfect circles. And then we have an angle like this, a triangle, with a good right angle right there to work with. Now for the paper itself, this is a grid that's 1 inches, 1 by 1, so 1 square inch, and then it has 4 subdivisions within each 1 inch square. So 1/4 inch little squares inside the 1 inch big squares. I actually prefer a grid that has 1/8 inch squares because of the scale I like to draw at, but this will work for our purposes. And speaking of the scale I like to draw at, I prefer to work at a scale of 1.5 inches equals 1 foot. So, if 1.5 inches equals 1 foot, each one of these little 1/4 inch squares would be 2 square inches. If it was an 1/8 inch grid, each of the little squares would be 1 square inch, which is, you can see why I prefer that. But we're going to make this work. Another thing I often like to do before I jump in here on the grid paper is create a little thumbnail sketch of what I want to do, kind of the general idea. Doesn't have to be exact, certainly not to scale, but just kind of give the general idea of the track plan. I've done hundreds and hundreds of little sketches like this, usually in ballpoint pen on these kind of pads. And then I'll take this and I'll translate it into an actual scale drawing that we can work with. Now, usually the first thing I want to do is define the space, right? The total area that's going to be taken up by layout. In this case, we're going to keep it real simple. I'm going to do a 4x8 layout. Oh, and by the way, if you use the metric system, I apologize. Everything in this video is going to be in imperial units. It's just the system we have here in the States. I know it's kind of silly, but translate best you can. So 8 feet would be 12 inches. So make a line up here, which is 12 inches long, following the grids here. So that's our 8 feet. And 4 feet would be 6 inches. There's 4 feet. Boom. So that's 4 by 8 feet. And one thing you got to keep in mind is, where are the humans going to go? Anytime, say you're designing this for a spare bedroom or something, you've got to leave allowances for, people on at least 3 sides of this thing, right? So, that's probably another 3 feet, which is 4.5 inches out that way, 4.5 inches out that way, 4.5 inches out that way. Just to kind of have a general idea of the allowances you're going to need to make for actual human beings. This is also a good time to talk about best practices, like how much reach there is, how far someone's going to have to reach across the layout to reach anything. 30 inches, 36 inches max is about as far as you want to have to reach across something like this to handle equipment or trains or clean the track or whatever. So that's something to keep in mind. And then, of course, you have to know the specifications of the equipment you want to run. What's the maximum grade that your equipment can climb, effectively without slipping and spinning wheels? What's the minimum radius that it can negotiate? And these are all things that you can find out about your different scales online. There are tables and things available that will tell you these things. Just do a quick search on Google, or do what I like to do and actually set up some sectional track on a piece of plywood and figure it out for yourself. Figure out what the minimum radius is that your locomotive can negotiate with a string of cars. What the grade is, how steep it can climb, and we'll be talking a little bit more about grades later. But for now, just keep in mind that those are things you need to know before you start drawing things that can actually be built in the real world. Things like the clearances between parallel tracks, the clearances between one track passing over another, stuff like that. Now, for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to design a pretty simple ON30 layout because that's what I'm most familiar with. And I usually like to start with the curves. Put my little thumbnail up here so I can see what I'm doing. It's a good idea to start at the corners with the curves. And so I'm going to measure out 18 scale inches. Should be, let's see, there's 8, 16, 17, 18. So that is 2 1/4. So we have an 18-inch radius curve set on our bar compass right here now. Another thing to talk about is track centers in relation to the edge of the layout. I find that 3 inches from the edge is pretty much as close as I ever want to go. With ON30, HO, smaller scales, you can get away with a little closer, but we're going to do 3 inches here. So let's see. I'm going to mark the center of this circle, the center of the radius, which is that X right there. Compass in and make our circle. I'm making it longer, bigger than I need it to be, and I can just erase the parts I'm not going to use. We'll do another one over on this side. I'll measure in 3 inches from the front fascia. And I'm going to put a straight track down here. And the reason I'm putting it down here is that I'm going to utilize this little bit of space right here to create a longer passing siding. It's an old trick. Rather than have this come off here and be a perfect circle, put a straight in right there. And now this is a place where your French curve comes in really handy. And I'm just guesstimating right now, just as if I was taking a piece of flex track and curving it around. Just going to do that. Take off these little stub ends. All right. Now we'll do something similar over on this side. So I know the engineers out there, your eyes are twitching. You're going to say, well, what is that? What's the radius of that curve? We don't know what the radius is. It doesn't matter. Sorry, it doesn't. It doesn't. All that matters is, you know, if it's wider than your minimum radius, and it allows you to enough straight track here to do what you need to do. We'll do a curve up here. I'm going to make this 24-inch radius, which will allow us to brings the main line in from the back of the layout, breaks up that straight, makes it a little more interesting. Straights. So we've got kind of a kidney bean shape going on. Now, one thing I'm not really adding on this are spiral easements. And a spiral easement is on a curve where it connects to a straight. Before that curve connects to the straight, it actually spirals out into a broader curve. So maybe like 18 inches radius would spiral out to a 22-inch radius curve. And that just makes it easier for the trains to negotiate that transition. I'm not adding that in this case. If you can, simply by offsetting here and moving that out a little bit and using your French curve to kind of spiral that easement out just like that. But space is really tight here, so I am not going to do that. And now we come to turnouts, and turnouts are tricky because it's easy to mess them up drawing them freehand. It's easy to get the angle wrong, and then when you go to build the thing, you have to compensate. I find it's a really good idea to measure turnouts in the real world. Take one, measure it, you know, and find out. Like for example, I'll just talk about a Pico ON30 turnout, which I'm very familiar with and use a lot. That one is going to be, they're 8 inches long from end to end, so 8 inches. The track starts to diverge after 2 inches, and then out here where the turnout ends, the track centers are 1 inch apart by the time it gets there. So knowing where those points are, I can rough in the turnout that's actually going to work. And no, it is not as precise and accurate as you're going to get with a track planning software program. But for most intents and purposes, works fine. Now for parallel tracks in ON30, I like to do a minimum of 3 inches. So measure up 3 inches from this front track. Draw a straight line. Okay. So now I just need to connect this to that and that. So now we have a passing track right there. And again, since this is ON30, this is real easy. I'm just using basic Pico ON30 turnouts, which I think are like a number 5 or somewhere in there. But if you have different size turnouts, you know, 5, 6s, 8s, 4s, whatever, then you're going to need to know the measurements for all of those. Sometimes it's handy to make a little template. All right, the spur track. Now, in order to add a little visual interest, I want this rear track to be higher than the track in the front. So when you're looking at it, it'll be more interesting visually. I think I want it to be about 2 inches, at least 2 inches higher. So we'll mark that right there, 2 inches. And now we're going to figure out a grade. Now there isn't a lot of room here for a grade in ON 30. And we don't want it to be too steep. I like a grade that's really no more than about 3%. So that's what I'm going to kind of aim for. And so I need to figure out where my zero elevations are. And I'm going to put a zero elevation on this turnout and a zero elevation on this turnout. So this is all flat and level right here. So our grade can go all on this track here. So a 3% grade would be a rise of 3 inches and 100 inches, right? So for every 100 inches, the track would rise 3 inches. That's a 3% grade. A 4% grade would rise 4 inches and 100 inches. A 2% it would rise 2 inches and 100 inches. You get the idea. So we need to figure out how high I can get this rear track and the amount of space I have from this zero elevation. And I didn't mention this, but it is important, I think, to have yards and passing sides and things like that all be level on the level at a zero elevation. So if you're switching cars or anything, they don't go rolling off on their own to parts unknown. So if I had a pair of dividers that worked, I would do it that way, but I don't. So I'm just going to use my ruler here, and I'm going to do it in twos. So I'm going to measure, 2, 4, 6, 8 until I get to 100, and that'll tell me what kind of grade I can fit in here. And I'm going to put a little hash mark on the track every 2 inches. 2, 4, 6. All right, so that's 50. That's halfway there. So on a 3% grade, you'd be talking, that'd be about 1.5 inches right there. Well, that's 75. So by the time we get to the center of this curve, we're at number 75. 75 inches from 0 point. So that's going to give us an elevation at a 3% grade of about 2.25 inches. Yeah, so keeping that 3% grade back down to zero elevation, I can have a whole area here about 2 feet, about 24 inches of run, where it's up at 2.25 inches higher than the track down here. That works pretty well for me. So that's pretty much our track plan right there. That's enough to get you started. That's enough to start building on. But now what I like to do is start adding in things like bridges and tunnels and natural features like that. Like over here, I want to have a bridge. So we've got a bridge there. And then I want this to be a bridge up here. And this whole thing is going to be, this would be like a nice place for a really detailed wooden trestle. And all I'm doing to indicate the bridge is just drawing tracks or drawing lines parallel to the track center line, giving me a bridge that's about 3 inches wide altogether. Back here, I want to have a tunnel, which should start right about here, I think. And I indicate a tunnel portal just like that. Again, making sure I'm giving myself enough room here. It's about 4 inches wide. So we've got a tunnel, we got a couple of bridges, and I indicated in my thumbnail, had a river going through here. And yours doesn't have to be pretty. Just some lines to indicate what you have in mind. You have to draw in little rocks and things like I do. The river. Okay, and now you want to start drawing in structures. And those can just be boxes. You really don't have to get any more complicated than that. Just make sure you give yourself enough clearance beyond the track center line. So you're going to measure back a couple of inches here. And then we'll just draw in a box for the depot. And of course, the size of these boxes will depend on the kits you buy, or the structures you scratch build or whatever, what those footprints are, you kind of need to know. So, we'll put a depot right here. And then over here, we'll put maybe a big mine building. Again, just a box. I tend to get much more elaborate in my drawings, but you don't have to. If you can use a straight edge, a triangle, a French curve, and a compass, you can do this, and a pencil, of course. Now, there are many more things you can indicate on a plan like this. Of course, you can add more structures besides just the line side structures. You can indicate wiring where gaps need to be for the operation of turnouts and things like that, where feeder wires need to come in. Usually do a little arrow like that to show where that would be connected. And, that will all depend on the kind of operation you want and the kind of control system you're going to use, whether straight DCC or straight DC or DCC or what have you. But that's the basics right there. And, from here, I usually get much more elaborate. I draw in ties as little hash marks and things like that. I'll draw in the actual sides of the grade, features like a mountain over here, all that kind of stuff. But that's all extra. To get building, to get track laid, to get trains running, this is all you really need to get started. And there you have it. That is my quick and dirty track plan drawing tutorial. I hope you got something good out of it. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you want to see more of this kind of thing. You can also follow Thunder Mesa on Instagram at thunder.mesa, or find out what's new on the Thunder Mesa Studio website. That's thundermesa.studio. And if you really like what we're doing here on the channel and want to help out, you can do what these nice folks did and head on over to patreon.com/thundermesa and show your support there. That's all for this time, folks. Thanks for watching. Keep moving forward, and adios for now.